My dad died when he was 60 years old. 60. I think about that number because when he was raising me, he had no idea what he was doing, and neither did my mom. No one does. There's no manual, no roadmap, maybe Dr. Oz, but they were doing their best with a kid like me. This is that kid. Hi, my name is Drew, and this is Measured Twice, Live Once. Columbia, Maryland, James Rouse's vision of what a community could be. A planned community where nobody put up fences. Every backyard flowed into the next. Every hill was a course we designed ourselves. Every sewer pipe was a tunnel waiting to be explored. We played outside because that is what you did, and we didn't have iPhones or social media or anything to stare at. We had an Atari, my two favorite games, Pitfall and River Raid. But my first choice, my only choice, was always fresh air. There was a creek under a bridge not far from my house. It was deep enough to matter, and there was a willow tree growing right on the bank. You would grab a big handful of branches and swing yourself down to the water. One time the branches snapped on the way down, and I landed flat my back in the water. I couldn't get any air in. I didn't know what getting the wind knocked out of you meant. All I knew was that I couldn't breathe, and the sky wasn't moving, and I was absolutely certain I was dying. Eventually, the air came back, but for a moment, it was just me and the babbling stream staring up at the blue sky, breathless. We also made kerosene torches out of rags wrapped around sticks, put on camouflage from head to toe, full face paint, and we disappeared into the rainwater pipes under the neighborhood. This was before you learned to be afraid of spiders and snakes, and before fear has a catalog. We would crawl through those pipes and end up in a storm drain on the other side. We would shoot bottle rockets at cars. Trevor's dad had the biggest Christmas light display in all of Columbia. His house was the landmark. That's where we played basketball. My other friend's backyard had Concord grapes growing all over the back patio, up the deck, blue, purple, hanging in clusters. To this day, the best grapes I've ever had in my life. We sledded down the path next to my house every winter, built ramps out of whatever we could find. We invented stunts that had no business being invented. One afternoon, my youngest sister broke her leg on a tree while we were sledding. I picked her up and carried her back to the house, put her in bed, made sure she was okay, and then I called for help. That was the kid. That was me. My room was red, white, and blue. Toy soldier wallpaper covering every wall. A white bed in the corner purchased from the catalog of either Sears or JCPenney. Well before IKEA, but I remember the fine details of screwing the panels together. Maybe I actually remember the fine details of unscrewing the panels since I was a child when they were put together by my dad. It was my bed, and I treated it like it was something important because to me it was. I drew almost every single day. Drew. Whatever came out of me that day went onto the paper, and whatever I was feeling, whatever I was seeing, whatever I was imagining. Some days it was the same drawing of Garfield the cat. I loved to draw cars, skulls with flames shooting out of their mouths, cartoon caricatures of family and friends. And when I had enough of them, when I felt like the collection was ready, I would slide every single drawing under the bed, every one of them labeled 5 cents, 10 cents, 25 cents. And then I would call my parents into the room, hand them a flashlight because that was the only way to see the show. Down on their hands and knees in the dark, squinting at everything I had made, trying to hold the flashlight steady while they moved from drawing to drawing. That kid was not afraid to be seen. He just made you work for it. My grandmother, Aug, my mom's mom, was a genuinely talented artist, and so was my mom. It was in the blood before I even knew what that meant. Grandma Aug gave me a sketchbook and I filled it. Almost every single day I put something in that book. In elementary school, they noticed something in me and put me in a gifted and talented after-school art program. I told the teacher I would only participate if my sister could be accepted too, and she said yes. I can't believe that worked. But we went together, and I got better in middle school when art was still a weekly class. God bless those teachers and those programs. In middle school, I also took shop class, big tools, real tools, the kind that demanded your full attention. I built my first cutting board in that class, my first and only cutting board. I had home economics too. I learned how to sew, starting with a simple stitched Care Bear and working my way up to a full stuffed animal seal. A seal that my cat loved to hump to pieces. I learned how to cook beef and bok choy. I learned how to type and write BASIC before computers were computers. God bless those creative classes because they were building something in me that I couldn't name yet. A Swiss Army knife of skills that I would spend the rest of my life pulling out one blade at a time. In middle school, when my sister Maggie came along, the wallpaper came down, the soldiers disappeared, and I moved downstairs into a bigger room with a big closet and a corkboard and space to spread out, and it felt like I had been upgraded. But the art never stopped. It never really stops. In high school, my teacher told me there were aspects of my drawing that simply weren't there. I stopped and looked at him and thought, wait. Art is self-expressive. There's no wrong way to draw a leaf, and that pissed me off. Same thing happened my first year in college in 3D sculpture class. Same feedback, same feeling, same frustration. I went back to school years later and took art classes again. I took them because later in life I realized how much art meant to me. I wasn't going to be an English teacher. I wasn't going to be a baseball player. I wasn't going to be a firefighter. But this time, I followed the teacher's instructions because I did not want to be told I was wrong again. And then one day during figure class, I looked at what I was making and said, screw this. And I painted the most abstract version of the human figure I could possibly imagine. I let everything loose. And it was awesome. It lit the light in Professor Dillinger's eyes, and I was finally the it artist. For the next 15 years, all I did was abstract painting. When I met Barbara, we started painting together. She was doing portraits at the time, so we switched, and I started doing portraits. And I am really good at them. At first, it was hard to break the pattern of abstraction, but before I knew it, I was painting every single day, making sure I had all of the paints, all of the brushes, everything exactly where it needed to be. Doesn't that sound familiar? Every day. And then one day I stopped. That is when the shop came back into my life. The kid under the bed with the flashlight never stopped making things. He just kept finding new ways to do it. I was not afraid to be heard. From the very beginning, I was not afraid to be heard. 3rd grade. We're doing a play about Paul Bunyan. All of the girls in the class wanted this kid named Chris to get the lead because he was so cute. And they were 8 years old, and that is how 8-year-olds work. I auditioned anyway. I was the loudest I could possibly be, and I won the role. My dad went into the garage and cut an axe and a saw out of plywood, built them by hand so his kid could walk out on stage looking like the real thing. My mom found a hair lay from the 1960s and turned it into a beard, figured out how to attach it to my face so I could stand up there and look the part. I still remember the words. We are going to saw and saw and saw and saw and saw and saw the Tim timber. A 3rd grader on a stage in a plywood axe and a hairpiece beard, not afraid of a single person in that room. I was loud and I was proud. 5th grade, we did the 1890 Music Hall Review, a musical history of the last decade of the old century. I guess this is no longer the old century. I played an immigrant. My mom sewed patches into my cardigan, the kind that said, "This family has nothing." And in the middle of the song, we would turn them inside out for a cardigan without patches. Rags to riches right there on stage. I had one line that I had never forgotten. But freedom is worth a long voyage. I didn't yet know how true that would become for my own life. That same year, we had balloon bags of milk. I don't know if you guys remember them, but they were plastic bags filled with white milk, chocolate milk, fruit punch. You could smack on one end and they would flip around. One afternoon at lunch, I hit my fruit punch so perfectly, with such exact and satisfying force, that it drenched every table around me in the lunchroom cafeteria. Fruit punch everywhere, kids jumping, chaos. That was the first time in my life somebody wanted to kick my ass. But I was not afraid to be heard, and apparently not afraid to make a mess either. Growing up, I was a drummer, not because I had some burning dream of playing drums my whole life. I chose the drums. My grandfather Andy played the saxophone, and maybe my father wanted me to be musical or musically inclined. Effort equals output. I practiced at school when I was supposed to practice. My cert-sucking, heavy-breathing school band teacher would get in my face and trace a nickel on the white melamine desk and say, "Dribble. Dribble in that hole." And I did not practice at home, and drumming was not what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I knew that. But I was good enough that it was mine, and I took it that seriously. One concert in particular, my band teacher pulled me aside before we went on. "You are not playing drums today. You're going to hit the triangle. One time." I stood there and I looked at him and felt something inside me just collapse. My ego was shattered. One hit on a triangle in front of everyone, family that came to see me, and just like that, the drums were gone. I would later try guitar my freshman year in college. My friend Dave sat down with me and taught me how to strum the strings. He told me that one day he was going to be a rock star, and I believed every word of it. Dave now fronts this band, TV on the radio. He owes me money for providing him money for school books when he was going to college. But that is neither here nor there. I have been told I have a nice voice to sing. I like singing at church, standing in the pew with the hymnal open, actually meaning it. But music as a craft, as something I could hold onto and build, that is something I cannot grasp. The triangle saw to that. One hit, and that was enough. I wanted to be Cal Ripken. As a kid growing up, my dad would measure my height with a book and a pencil. Cal Ripken, 6'4" was at the top. That was my dream. To be the Iron Man, to show up every single day and be exactly who you said you were going to be. I loved Eddie Murray. I said, "Dad, I want to play baseball, even if I'm on an all-girls team." And he said, "Okay." My first home run when I was 9 years old. I was using a slightly bent aluminum bat that I always credited with the assist. I made solid contact, but that bend in the bat put the ball in an unexpected arc toward left center. From that day forward, every single time I stepped to the plate, I would pose, legs spread, like Eddie Murray, waving that bat ferociously. And the opposing coaches would start screaming to their outfielders, "Get back! Get back!" They based that decision solely on my stance. And I would drop a single right in front of them every time. I was really good at baseball. In the summer of 1986, visiting my cousins in Charlotte, North Carolina, I went to a game, Memphis Chicks versus the Charlotte O's. I was 13 years old and I had no idea I was about to witness something nobody had ever seen before. I was there for the Orioles. I got Billy Ripken's autograph. I was therefore closer to Cal. But before the game, I walked right up to the Chicks bench and I asked a player for an autograph. He looked at me and said, "Come see me after the game." So I waited. That night, this player stepped up to the plate and hit his first professional home run. The ball went over the left field fence and the crowd lost its mind. After the game, I walked up to his trailer and knocked on the door. His bodyguard came out and looked down at me. "What do you want?" I said, "A player told me to stop by after the game." 2 minutes later, there I was standing in front of Bo Jackson getting my autograph. That kid never waited for permission. He just showed up and trusted that the door would open, and it did. I met Trevor through scouts. His dad was my scoutmaster, and his house was a landmark of the neighborhood. The man had the biggest Christmas light display in all of Columbia, and everybody knew it. That's where we played basketball. When I became a patrol leader, they gave me a new patrol and told me to build it. I asked for all of the smallest kids on the roster, every single one of them. We had a large troop at the time, maybe 120 young boys, young men. We were affectionately known as Drew and the Seven Dwarfs, or the Tiger Patrol. And we might have been small, but we had some of the biggest brains out there and we knew how to use them. Scotty, Doug, Chris, and Kevin, who you met in a previous episode. Great guys. At the time, only 1% of all boys in America became Eagle Scouts. 1%. It was a big deal and everybody in scouting knew it. My dad was a Life Scout, which is one rank below Eagle. That one rank pushed me to go all of the way. I obsessed about getting merit badges the way I obsessed about everything that captured my attention. By the time I became Eagle, I had earned 35 merit badges, and that was legitimately a serious number. I was the biggest, baddest scout in the room. This makes what happened at the mall scout fair when I was in middle school even funnier. I was working a booth when I spotted two of the popular girls walking toward us from across the mall. I panicked. I dropped straight down under the table, didn't say a word to anyone, and I just disappeared. I could see the tips of their shoes passing under the tablecloth. One day, the eventual biggest, baddest scout in the room, who has his Eagle Scout award, featured prominently on his desk today. But today, he was hiding from two girls at the mall. In the summer of 1989, we were returning from Halliburton Scout Camp up in Canada, and we stopped overnight in Buffalo, staying in a church. We were allowed to go check out the mall when we got back, and we met some girls right away. Not my type. I didn't really have a type. Then we met some other girls, and one of them said, "My dad owns the movie theater. We can go watch a movie." We went back to the Scoutmaster and negotiated our time. He said we could go as long as we were back by 10. We ran back to the theater, met the girls, and got our free tickets, sat down, and watched half the movie, Jason Takes Manhattan. I actually kissed that girl. That was my first kiss ever, and I was pretty happy about that. But time rang and we had to run back to the church, and the original girls were waiting out front, and one of them looked right at me and said, "I heard you hooked up with Stephanie. She has a disease." I looked at her, said, "Who cares?" and triumphantly walked right past them into the church. Upon entering, I immediately ran to the nearest bathroom and washed my mouth out with bar soap, scrubbed until I could taste nothing but soap. And when I finally pulled the girl I kissed, my first kiss number, out of my pocket to look at, it said Jessica. That first girl, she got me really good. My friend Trevor was a scout too. He taught me Led Zeppelin, which changed everything about how I heard music. We wore bandanas and torn flannels and ripped jeans like it was a uniform. He introduced me to hot rods, his 72 four-door Nova, the smell of the engine, the whole world that came with it. Minor Threat, Fugazi, the kind of music that made you feel like the world had edges worth finding. I got him a job at the lumberyard because that's what you did for your best friend. We played basketball together constantly, and I would beat him so badly that he would get to the point where he was ready to quit and never play again. And that is when I learned something that has stayed with me ever since. It was better to lose and play than to win and not. So I would purposely throw games. I would let him beat me just enough to keep him in it, because the game mattered more than the score, and because basketball mattered more than winning. I was emotional, I wanted to win. I had friends growing up, and I was a good kid in the way that good kids are. Not perfect, not without edge, but genuinely trying to do right by the people around me. I wouldn't say I was popular, but I had friends, and that felt like enough. And then somewhere in seventh grade, everything shifted. Seventh grade is the worst year for a lot of people, and I was not exempt. I had glasses, crazy hair, braces, and just like that, I was labeled a nerd. Some of my friends stopped hanging out with me, just quietly disappeared, the way middle schoolers do when social math changes and they decide which side of the line they want to be on. What made it worse was that I didn't even get the best grades, and I was really good at sports, but I was a nerd. The label had nothing to do with who I actually was and everything to do with how I looked that year. In eighth grade, nobody would let me play basketball at recess. Just shut me out completely like I wasn't standing right there. So one day I brought my own ball in and played with my friends and fuck those other guys. And just like that, they wanted to play with my ball. Just not me. One of them got right in my face and said, "I'll kick your ass if you don't let us play." It is stupid. It was genuinely stupid. And I never brought that ball again. Not once. My parents got divorced around this time. My mom recognized that I needed some kind of support through it, and she found a program called Children of Separation and Divorce. We were the it kids of the divorce world. We appeared in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. These children of broken homes that everyone wanted to talk about and study and hold up as examples. But I also recognize now the damage we did to our parents for the thrill of being commended. In family sessions, I would get all worked up about my father, say things that painted him a certain way. He didn't deserve that. It was a show, and I was performing for an audience the same way I performed as Paul Bunyan in third grade, except this time the cost was real and the person paying it was my dad. That is one of my biggest regrets. I went to Mount St. Joe for 2 years. My father went to Bergen Catholic in New Jersey before me, and there was an expectation that came with that. Not spoken necessarily, but understood. You follow your father into a Catholic school because that is what you do. It was a legacy, and I honored it. I played football, tight end for the first 3 games, and I caught a pass, which felt like exactly what I was supposed to be doing out there. But our passing attack was bad, and I was one of the bigger guys on the team, so they moved me to guard. And that sucks. Guard means your job is to protect someone else's moment. You do the work and somebody else gets the glory, and you were supposed to be fine with that. I was not fine with that. Once again, I was playing the triangle. I had a growth spurt in sixth grade that was something to behold. It went from 5'2" to 5'10" in a single year. I would bust out of my shoes every month as my shoe size climbed all the way up to 13. My body was becoming something different faster than anyone around me could categorize it. At Mount St. Joe, I would leave the house at 5 in the morning and not get home until 9 or 10 at night. Sports, practice, the commute, all of it stacked on top of each other, day after day. And at some point, I looked at my life and did the math. I went to my dad and I told him straight, if you ever want me to talk to a girl, I need to go to public school. He listened. He didn't fight it. He didn't push back, didn't make it a whole thing. He just heard me and said, okay. So I went to Oakland Mills. At first, I was the crazy punk rock kid from nowhere. The outsider with the torn flannel and the bandana who didn't know anybody and didn't quite fit the existing social map. My sister was a freshman when I was a junior, and that helped more than I can say. Just having someone in the building who knew who I was made the whole place feel less foreign. And the girls were like, who is this new guy? That was strange. I know you, but you don't know me yet? Halfway through my junior year, I sat down at a table full of girls at lunch. They were cool in that way that certain people are just effortlessly cool, straight out of 16 Candles, that kind of ease. And just like that, the switch worked. My sister is gorgeous, and in my mind, I think some of her beauty rubbed off on me just by proximity. And that is my story, and I'm sticking to it. One of my biggest tormentors in middle school was this girl, and I'll call her C. She made those years harder than they needed to be in the way that certain people do when they decide someone is beneath them and act on it without a second thought. I carried that. I didn't talk about it much, but I carried it. My junior year, her friend came up to me and asked if I would take C to prom. I sat with that for a moment. She had long, curly hair, And I thought about what would make her say no without me having to say no. So I told her friend, I'll take her, but only if she gets a haircut. I was absolutely certain she would never do it. That backfired completely. She got the haircut, and just like that, she was my date to the prom. I picked her up. We went to dinner. We sat across from each other at the table, and I waited until the right moment. And then I let her know, calmly, clearly, without any drama, that because of the way you treated me in middle school, our night together would end right here at this table. I did it for all of the nerds. Every single kid who got labeled something they did not deserve and lost friends they should not have lost and got shut out of games they had every right to play. I did it for all of them. We got to prom and we went our separate ways. The first girl I ever really talked to was Dawn in middle school. We never dated, never made it something with a name, but she taught me how to talk to a girl, how to be present with someone, how to let yourself be smitten without running from it. And then she moved to Calumet City, and that was that. Love is such a nuanced word. We are still social media friends. Then there was Lauren. Lauren had a boyfriend named Bobby when I met her. We sat next to each other in French class and at the cafeteria table, and somewhere in the proximity, something started happening. She broke up with Bobby, and we started dating. And she was the cutest girl in the school, a senior superlative. The kind of recognition that comes from the whole grade agreeing on something without anyone calling a meeting. I acted crazy in that way. I've always acted crazy when I am comfortable with someone, jumping over tables, reenacting entire scenes from Star Wars in the middle of French class, making the whole room look up from whatever they were doing. I would leave class sometimes and disappear to Taco Bell in Fort Meade, like we had somewhere important to be, and with me, I took everyone's order. She opened me up in ways I didn't expect. Good music I hadn't found yet. The Gap, J. Crew. The punk rock kid in the torn flannel and the bandana was now standing in a fitting room trying on something that didn't have a single hole in it. I still have a black belt from the Gap. I still have my Doc Martens from Commander Salamander. She went to Smith College after graduation. I visited her on my first ever solo flight, just me and a ticket and no idea what I was doing. And there she was on the other end of it. She was cool. She had a beautiful spirit. Honestly, it sucks the way Lauren and I broke up. But she has a beautiful family now. And I am with the woman of my dreams. And I never would have met her if my life was perfect. For my 16th birthday, my dad said I could have a drink. I said, no way. I was not that kid. I never wanted to be bad. I never wanted to do anything illegal. But I did it. And I was hilarious. I felt like the king of the world sitting there with this thing in my hand that I was not supposed to have, laughing at everything, funnier than I have ever been, looser than I knew I could be. The whole room felt different. I filed that away somewhere without knowing I was filing it. Around the same time, I was working at Giant with a guy named Craig, and Craig introduced me to cocaine one night. It happened exactly once. The problem was that I had just donated blood earlier that day. I ran home like a madman, heart pounding, absolutely certain something was wrong with me, convinced I had made the worst decision of my life. I never touched it again. I never wanted to be bad. I never wanted to do anything illegal. Those two things have always been true about me. But the drink at 16 sat somewhere in the back of my mind like a door left slightly open. I didn't know that yet. I just knew I was hilarious. I just knew I felt like the king of the world. I never wanted to be bad, and I just wanted to be loved. These are my memories, told the way I remember them. Other people in these stories have their own version, and their version matters just as much as mine. In AA, we have a principle. We don't hurt people while telling our story, or while making amends. So if you're in one of these stories and it doesn't match how you remember it, that's okay. I'm not trying to win an argument. I'm just trying to understand my own life. I'll see you next time. Keep building.